Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and I'm really excited for today's episode. And I know I say that every single time I open up the show, but I genuinely am very excited about each of these episodes. Today's guest is a leader in organizational change management and learning and development. She's been recognized for making an impact at T-Mobile. She's currently a manager of learning and development and organizational change management office within the technology organization at T-Mobile. Please welcome Maddie Neuman. Hello, Maddie.
Hey, Justin, how's it going?
It's awesome. I truly am excited. I loved the preparation call that we had together to get ready for today's podcast. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today. So let me start off as we always do and get your take on what you feel is the biggest challenge you see facing the deskless workforce today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on. Excited for the conversation, excited to be part of the podcast. I love the question. I think it's a really important one, and I'm glad that we're starting with it. I think, I don't know if it's the biggest challenge, but I feel like it's a really big challenge just around the siloed nature of organizations and how those silos really, I think, inhibit feedback loops and communication, bi-directionally, right? So from our, upper leadership levels down to, all employees who are, on the ground, whether they be deskless workers or, just on the front lines. I think sometimes even if communication is trickling down, it changes as and morphs as it moves along. And so I think, sometimes the issue is the lack of communication, and sometimes the issue is the changing of the communication as it makes its way through. So I think that's a really big challenge. And I would say also an opportunity for organizations to look at how to get that right and how to make sure that employee voice and sentiment from the front line is heard and taken seriously, and how communication from whatever level of leadership is making its way to frontline workers as well in the way that they intended.
You raised a really good point about silos inside really large organizations. And just as you were describing that, a couple of discrete organizations come to mind, when we're thinking about big transformational initiatives. So I'm thinking of the actual business unit themselves, the IT organization that supports them, perhaps learning and development teams, which may be, rolling up into HR and may not roll into the business or into IT. Do those three represent the kind of silos that you're talking about? And are there others that I've left out?
Yeah, I think that those can be silos. And, I think no organization is exempt from this idea of silos. And, you say that word and it's almost like a bad word, and I don't know, the way organizations are structured, silos are important, right? We can't just have this mass group of employees with no organization whatsoever, just sort of all in this big blob, right? And so, the nature of organizational structure creates the silos. But I think if we're not careful about how communication is flowing among the silos and how feedback is making its way up and down, how information's flowing, I think that's where the problems come. It's not the silo themselves. It's just being really intentional within those structures to make sure that, they're prioritizing understanding employee voice, sentiment, feedback, any number of different items there. We have to be careful and intentional, or else we will see that breakdown.
And the role for the change management teams is, at least to some extent, to herd the cats, right? And to be the traffic cop for bringing some of that stuff together. So I want to explore that. I actually want to drill down into that quite a bit, but I'm going to put that on pause for 1 minute because I want you to share with us and the audience here a little bit about your background. So tell us a little bit about your role at T-Mobile today And I'd really love for you to dig back in and kind of tell us your whole journey and how you ended up in that role. So first of all, tell us about your current role today.
Sure. Yeah. So I lead a team. It's, I would say, a unique situation where we have a learning and development team. So a team of instructional designers and program coordinators and managers who are all focused on employee learning. And then the other side of the team is an organizational change management team made out of change managers who are helping, support change throughout the organization and support employees through that change. So kind of both sides of this team work together as we are navigating change together, as we're rolling new things out, as we're responding to, change that we're seeing proactively, sometimes reactively. And, it's sort of just two sides of this coin that I think operate really, really well together. So I spend my day supporting an amazing team of employees as we try and mostly just create an amazing experience for our employees, for T-Mobile as a whole, and as well as just trying to, stay ahead of what we see in front of us, especially as we're navigating a shift to hybrid work, a shift in how we think about work, and then of course all of the items that come with digital transformations and all of the change that we're seeing across organizations right now.
So does your organization roll up into HR since you have such a strong bent in L&D? I'm curious about where that rolls in your org.
Yeah, for us, we are partners with HR, so we aren't in the same group, but other parts of the organization organize their kind of learning and change teams differently. So for us, we work side by side with HR as well as with our communication partners, and so we're really kind of, I would say, like a three-legged stool of employee support.
Yeah, it's been interesting as we've been kind of going down this path with this, change management series on the podcast, and we've had a lot of conversations with folks like yourself. There have been, it's interesting to see no two organizations are the same. So in many cases, change management pros are deeply embedded inside IT. In other organizations, they're not. And it's just really interesting to see how different organizations have prioritized change management and where they've placed that function.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know that there's a right way to do it, to be honest. I think I see benefits and opportunities to multiple ways to embed change management and learning and development. I think just the key is finding what works for you and for your organization and setting it up that way. But I don't think there's a one size fits all structure at all.
No, I had a new recruit on an interview about a month ago. We've since hired him, so now he's a member of our team, and it may be in part because of the story I'm about to tell you. When he was in our office, he put up something on the whiteboard, which is a triangle where he put IT at one point, L&D on another point, and then the business organization on another point. And we were just talking about, in my day job, we have a technology platform that, we work with large enterprises and we deal with a lot of change management professionals. And so he was inquiring with me about, which of the personas we work with inside the organization. And I basically said, well, all of them. But I had this epiphany moment when he drew that out visually. It was really powerful for me because I realized that the change management folks sit right in the middle of that triangle. And that it was, now I do not have a change management background. I really am trying to learn from all of you as we're going through these interviews so that we can understand the dynamics that you deal with every day. But it just made me realize that part of what I hear from all the change management practitioners is that they are trying to coordinate the activities between those three silos to make sure that the end result is successful among them. Do you think that's a fair way for me to describe it and assess it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. And I'd say your new recruit is on it.
He's on the right path.
A great hire. Absolutely. I mean, I think change management really sits at the heart of that triangle for a reason, right? Because it's not just looking at one specific part of the business, right? It really is the core of how we communicate with individuals, how we bring them along on the journey, how we understand pain points and opportunities, what we assess skill gaps, right? And we understand, hey, maybe the lack of adoption we're seeing around a specific change, maybe it's actually not related to a desire to adopt. A lot of times folks really do want to be on board. They really do want to change, but they might not know how, right? And so then we go, oh, this is a training opportunity or learning opportunity. So then the change folks might tap on, our learning and development folks. But, sometimes it is an issue of desire or, change overwhelm, in which case, we got to shift gears and we got to take kind of a different approach. And so change managers can't do that well unless they're kind of positioned at that center, at the heart.
Yeah. And I think it probably matters less which department they are officially reporting into. And it's more about them having the ability to reach across into those other silos to herd the cats and bring everything toward that common goal. Right. And you said something earlier that I agree with completely. Those silos are important because within those functional groups, they have a purpose for specialization, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
But there needs to be somebody in the organization that's pulling that together and thinking about, particularly in a lot of the digital transformation initiatives that we're talking about. What is that end employee experience going to be? What are we trying to solve from this from a broader business perspective, and how do we really make that a positive experience for everybody?
Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how you even got into this role, where you went to school, and how you ended up in this job at T-Mobile.
Oh boy. Are you ready for a windy road?
Yes, I definitely want to hear that.
Okay. All right. So, I always start by saying, I had a non-traditional journey, right? And I have air quotes up around non-traditional. I don't know if I'll say that anymore. I think now the traditional journey is that it is non-traditional, right? There is no defined path, right? So I think, there's an opportunity to normalize finding our way on this road that we couldn't have predicted. So yeah, for me, I got my degree in English literature and secondary education from Western Washington University up in Washington State. And with that, decided I wanted to become an English teacher. That was something, ever since I was younger, I was sort of thinking, I either want to be an English teacher or I want to be a talk show host. And those are, similar and dissimilar in some ways. But I remember talking to an advisor in college, and, I don't know if I just didn't give the talk show host vibes, but she was, encouraging me to pursue teaching. So anyhow,
you're just going to have to explain to me the similarity between being an English teacher and a talk show host, because that's not obvious to me. Help me understand that connection. Yeah.
Well, so I, spoiler alert, did become an English teacher, so maybe I can see it in reverse. But
okay,
a talk show host is really presenting information. They are capturing an audience. They are bringing people along. They are asking great questions. They are trying to get the most out of the folks with them in the room. Maybe I'm stretching, but
no, I don't think you are. That makes sense.
Yeah. So anyhow, fast forward, became a teacher, got my degree, and I taught high school for a couple of years, and then I taught middle school for a couple of years. So I think I've taught pretty much every grade from 6 to 12. And I sort of had this crossroads moment in my mind where I thought I could teach forever. I really could. I loved being a classroom teacher. I loved the dynamic of making, great relationships with students who, had potential that they could or couldn't see. And I loved helping unlock that in them and helping see things that maybe they couldn't within themselves. And then I also thought, I'm so interested in so many things, and I don't know if I'll be a classroom teacher forever. And so I actually ended up going back to school while I was teaching online, got my master's in organizational leadership and learning from George Washington University. So fun fact, I never stepped foot on the campus until my graduation day with my master's. It was all completely online. And so, yeah, I think at the heart of what helped me make that pivot was just an interest in how people learn, how people think, what makes people want to come to work, whatever work might be, and how do we help people enjoy the experience, and eventually understanding that I'm interested in helping them learn on the job, helping them upskill, reskill potentially, and then obviously also an interest in helping people change. So that pivot really led me into a space of organizational learning, training, and then ultimately change management. And then I find myself here at T-Mobile where I've blended both. And, so I think, like I said earlier, only in hindsight could I have seen that, this journey ultimately fits together. But while I was in the midst of it, it was confusing. I didn't really know where I was headed at some points. But I think it was that diversity of experience that really led me to this space where I can understand, where I feel like my value lies.
Yeah. And knowing where you've arrived at this point in time in your career, and when you look back and review your education journey, as you just described, would you do anything differently if you could go back and do it over again?
Ooh, the ultimate question. I don't think I would really. I think my experience as a teacher really informed and does inform my day to day. I don't think I would be the same person. I don't think I would be the same employee or leader if I didn't start there. And I really do see, I see the common thread. And if that wasn't part of the thread, it just wouldn't be the same picture.
Yeah. My wife was a middle school teacher, and I don't know how in the world anybody in the world does that job. I really don't.
That's what everyone says. And I agree. I agree with why people say that. It is any teaching role or any role in a school, right? Public, private, doesn't matter. It's challenging. So, shout out to all of the teachers, the educators out there. It really is hard. Like everyone says, it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get back to what we originally talked about, which is the frontline workers and some of the challenges around that. So your answer to the question was some of the challenges that come from siloed communication or the lack of communication that doesn't necessarily always make it to the frontline workers.
Yeah.
What do you think if we were to pull together a team of the frontline workers that you've been around throughout your career, what do you think they might say is the biggest challenge they're facing today? Would they describe it the same way, or do you think they'd have a different take on it?
That's a really good question. I think they might agree, but I think they might frame it differently, which is that, hey, as a frontline employee, I'm closest to the problems that you at the leadership level or, at the level of steering and guiding mission and goals that you might not be able to see. And you should listen to me. I have ideas and answers. And so I think they might say that.
Yeah. You just made me realize so many people have talked about that frontline workers feel like they're not always being heard.
Yep.
And that's a big lesson that I've taken away from I think we've done about 10 podcasts now on with change management practitioners. And this has come up often. And in fact, it even came up with some folks who aren't necessarily change management practitioners, but are involved in, transformational initiatives with technology. And I think this is becoming a common theme where they feel like they are outcasts to some extent in terms of, there are these things that happen at corporate and then there's everybody else.
Yeah.
And we would all be better served. They would be better served. We would be better served as those folks implementing that change if we could give them a voice. And not only would we probably learn some amazing things that aren't obvious to us when we're working in an air-conditioned conference room, but we would also better facilitate the change when it comes back around because they would feel like they've been a part of that. That's
exactly it. I think it's a multi-prong opportunity, problem, however you want to frame it. It's not just one thing, right? There's the, hey, we're not being heard. But within that, when you peel that back, that has a lot of that's dynamic, right? There's pieces around, we don't have the opportunity to be heard. There's the piece of we're trying to speak and you're not listening. Or there's maybe even the piece of we are speaking up, you're listening, but the solution that you're coming up with doesn't match what we shared or doesn't match the problem that we shared. So I think that there's a lot there, and not surprised to hear that this is a common theme. I don't remember where I read it, but just this last week, I came across an article that was mentioning an organization that had what they're calling a chief listening officer, which I think is pretty cool, and maybe my new dream job. I don't know, but literally their job is to think about ways to implement solutions, create channels that help all employees feel actually heard, not pretend heard or maybe heard, but actually heard.
You're reminding me of a situation, just going back a long time, and this is a memory that I think I've repressed for the most part.
Okay, but, I'm glad we could dig it up.
Back in the early, sometime around the mid 90s, I guess, I had a job at one of my first telecom related companies. And the general manager for the area had pulled together a team and had asked us all for some feedback on a few questions. And I don't even remember the details of the questions. I just remember that we had spent some time kind of pulling our thoughts together, and we kind of met and did a couple of workshops on our own. And we had an opportunity to present these ideas back to the GM. And the GM came back and basically just told us that all of our ideas were completely stupid, and he stormed out of the room.
Oh my gosh.
It was that experience. I didn't stay at that company for very long after that.
I can see why.
For a whole bunch of reasons. But you reminded me of that when you said, listening is the first part of that interaction, but then we have to, implement some of those changes and not think that we always know better than the advice that we're getting back from the frontline workers, right? They have an amazing vantage point. They are literally on the front lines. That's why we call them frontline workers. They're interacting with customers or interacting with the network, right? They are out there actually doing the work that all of us at headquarters are trying to support. And so to not take their perspective into account is just a shame. So listening is only half of it, but then actually giving their feedback the credibility that it deserves and making sure that we're implementing that is just hugely important. Absolutely.
And, as we think about, organizations are grappling with how do we engage employees when we're distributed? We're all over the place. We've got folks in the front line. Now our, folks in the office, they're all over the place. They're in office and at home and hybrid, and so now that we're so distributed, we need to also think about how do we engage together? And I think that act of listening and then actually taking related action, I guess I would say, doesn't have to be exact action, but related action that makes employees feel heard. I think that's one way to really engage them and make them feel like they are part of this organization, that they're valued, and that their opinion actually matters.
Yeah.
So
what do you think has changed for the frontline workers since the pandemic? Do you think the frontline workers that you interact with I know they've been impacted. Perhaps I should just ask, how have they been impacted? What have you seen from your view?
Yeah, I mean, frontline workers are amazing. They're heroes, I would say, within this pandemic. I mean, when COVID first hit, right, everyone who wasn't a frontline worker got to go and kind of hunker at home and sort of wait it out and see what was going on. And, there's much being discussed around how folks adapted digitally. And I think that's amazing. But we can't forget the folks who didn't get to go home and didn't get to hunker and kind of wait it out. And so there's so much bravery and courage in that. And so, I think from an impact perspective, I don't know that I can best speak on it, because I would want to ask a frontline worker, hey, how do you feel like you've been impacted? I don't want to speak for them, but I mean, I think really it's, maybe even a re-recognition of just how vital that role is in, really they're the heartbeat. They're what's keeping our organizations alive. They're the folks who, were still out there as customers were in stores, as folks were calling on the phone. They were there. And I think that impact is huge. It's probably hard to quantify that impact.
I feel like in the business that we have during my day job, we've always had a pretty good finger on the pulse of frontline workforces, just because it's what we're focused on. But one of the changes that I saw happen during the pandemic was a shift in terminology to essential workers. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. Like that's a term that, sure, it sounds obvious and intuitive now when we throw it out there, but that's a term that I don't remember ever really hearing prior
Yeah.
to, March of 2020. And so I think that's really been pretty interesting to me is I've always tried to educate, especially new people coming into our business. I've encouraged them to look around, right? When you get to the grocery store and you look at all this product on the shelves, how do you think that stuff ended up there? Where do you think it was manufactured? How do you think that supply chain, fed all the products, the raw materials into what became a product that's now sitting on the grocery store, and you just grab it off the shelf and you go check out and you don't really think much about it right up until the moment when that stuff isn't there. And then all of a sudden we all start thinking back and, supply chain is a phrase that everybody in America and probably around the globe is using right now. Yep. So we have become increasingly aware, and I'm actually excited about that. I hope that we're able to hold on to some of this awareness now and give the men and women on the front lines the credit they deserve for, keeping the earth rotating the way that it does, and making sure that all of us who may not necessarily be personally involved in supply chain management or, deliveries of food and beverage products to the stores, that we can appreciate the role that they play in the economy. And I think hopefully that will be a silver lining that comes from this whole just crazy experience that we've all been through for the last couple of years.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, nothing like absence that really makes us notice, some of that invisible superpower that keeps us chugging along. I mean, absolutely.
And it is an organization like yours. You've got, the network folks, the men and women who are making sure that the network is running, 24/7, 365. You've even got supply chain folks that are making sure that, new equipment can be delivered to those men and women who are keeping the network running. And then you've got retail operations and sales operations and all of those things. And we do really just take that stuff for granted. So I think as we've contemplated, what are all the experiences of all of us, like you said very well, they didn't have the luxury of doing their job from home. And so we all need to keep that in mind as we're thinking about these transformation, initiatives going on. And I'm curious, you mentioned this before, and I don't remember the word that you used, but you were basically referring to kind of change saturation.
Yep.
That's an expression that I've heard a lot lately with the change management practitioners I've talked to. So when you're thinking about digital transformation inside your organization, how much does that play a part in how you're thinking about the change strategy for that group? Do you look at that group and say, they're dealing with too many other changes right now, we should delay this technology project? Or how does that affect your thinking and the strategy that you build out and implement?
I love the question. I think it's one that we as change professionals are asking all the time. And it's one that we're really trying to help educate the rest of the organization about, this idea of change saturation or, change fatigue. I think they're related, but they're different. So change saturation is how much change are we pumping through the organization? And also, let's not forget all the change that's happening outside of the organization, globally and societally. So that matters too. That compounds the change inside the organization. But the change fatigue is kind of the result, right? It's, hey, humans can only endure so much change at one time. 2020, 2021 has, I think, tested and maybe even expanded our capacity for change. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't change the fact that, there's a limit to how much change an individual or an organization can actually go through at once. And so a lot of what we do in our team is help provide visibility to that via, some dashboards, some, spreadsheets, in conversation, sort of pulling the full picture together and saying, hey, we're talking about change A right now, but let's also consider we currently are asking employees to adapt to B, C, D, E, and F as well. And not only does that inhibit their ability to adapt to change A, but it also inhibits their ability to adapt to B, C, D, E, and F. So what is most important, or what are the top, one or two changes that we prioritize right now, knowing that we can get to the other ones later, but we can't do them all well right now.
When you describe, two things come to mind with the example that you just shared. The first is the silos, right? So that you described at the top of this conversation, which is that perhaps some people that are sitting within one of those silos are looking at their change that they're trying to implement, or the initiative that they have, and to them it's fairly small, and it may be actually fairly small. But when it's combined with all of the changes that are coming in from all of the other silos, then you just reach a saturation point where it's like, yes, your change isn't that big of a deal. But when you take it in the context of what the end user is experiencing on the other side of this, it is to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a diagram we've been using in some presentations and, honestly, conversation at this point. And it shows 3 layers, right? So we show the widest layer. We show it's the global, it's the societal change. And so it's all things around COVID and vaccines and global health, parents having to
kids going to school
and teach at home. Exactly. Parents are now teachers, racial injustice and all that's being, shared around, in that social justice space. All of that is sort of buzzing around us, right? And then we take the next frame in and we look at within our organization, right? We've got digital transformations, we've got, shift to how we think about, remote work and hybrid work and, whatever individual changes, companies are going through. And then we come in one layer more and we think about person to person, individually, right? All our lives are full of change, right? Folks are adapting to new roles, the family stress, friends, health of loved ones. When you zoom all the way out and you see kind of that 3-layer view, it's overwhelming, right? And I think just taking that view and just sort of considering it is a really important place to start.
I'm saying this sort of sarcastically, but what you just described sounds almost un-American for us to like consider all of that change as if it's some kind of burden. And what I mean by that is it's like, yeah, well, we just got to put the pedal to the metal anyway. We just got to go make this happen. Right. You're helping to raise awareness that you're absolutely right. All of those layers that you just described, it is a burden just in the normal course of every day. Right.
Yep.
And then we've got change. I mean, your organization is on the backside of this now, from what I can tell from the outside looking in. But you just went through a massive merger of 2 of the major companies in your industry.
Yep.
There's a massive amount of change for people on both sides of that. Just
Absolutely.
that in and of itself, even if you're not personally involved on the integration team, you have a lot of change that you're experiencing, and that's an added layer that's really beyond even the layers that you just described. Right? That was a major transformation in your enterprise.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the fact that it was, able to be kind of closed and done in the middle of a pandemic is just amazing. Never heard about it before. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, absolutely. And, I think that we talk about that as well as, hey, that's still reverberating, right? Like just because the merger, the deal is done, we're now, one company, it doesn't mean that the change is over, right? We're still integrating people, processes, tools, cultures, et cetera.
Yeah. And to make sure that our audience doesn't think that I'm un-American, I feel like I need to explain just a little bit more about what I mean. I just think that sometimes we have a tendency in our culture, and I think there's good about this. We tend to try to plow through some of that stuff, right? Power on, just push through it. And I think that's part of who we are as Americans. I love that part of our culture. And, but it also makes me realize that there are probably unintended consequences of that perseverance to push that through. And it may be insensitive and ultimately it may sabotage what we're trying to do inside the enterprise. Right.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's, it's almost, trite at this point to bring it up. I think so many folks are talking about this, but one of the, I think, gifts of 2020, 2021, this pandemic, it's given us this, it's turned everything on its head, right? And we've got a chance to now evaluate what's working and what's not working, right? And I think what you're describing, this kind of hustle culture of just get it done, just do it, it doesn't matter how hard it is or what sacrifices you're making, just go and do, right? And I think now organizations and individuals are looking at, well, hold on, I'm burnt out, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. Do I want to do that, right? Do I want to live my life that way? And I think organizations they have an opportunity to adapt to that. And I'm seeing that as well, a lot more focus on mental health, focus on employee well-being in really serious ways. And so I think that's been a real benefit to come out of this really tough almost 2 years now.
I agree. I think it's caused all of us to reflect about a lot of things, about work, about life, about the groups and the people that we associate with, and how we're conducting ourselves. And so, as we continue to evolve back into, some sense of normalcy, I think, the backside is going to look different than the way things did, prior to 2020. And I think that's neat. I think it's forced some changes that I think are really positive, and there'll be other things that we wish were different, and maybe some things that just get back to the way that they were before. But overall, I think we can all accept that we're, our work and personal lives are probably going to be, quite a bit different for the foreseeable future. I think that's okay.
Yeah, agreed. Right. And if we don't adapt and we don't change based on what we learned, then, what a missed opportunity. Right. But I think, to your point, we know a lot more now. We've had a vantage point to look at things differently. And what we do with that next is really, I think, important.
Yeah. My favorite change, I've talked about this before, but my favorite change from the pandemic from a work standpoint is we were early adopters of video conferencing technology at my company.
Yep.
And the company originally began as a remote only company. And so we were using video conferencing as a way to bridge the gap. And it took a while to get everybody on the team to start turning on their cameras and to stop feeling uncomfortable when their dog started barking when the UPS person showed up and whatever. We got through that transition, but when we would still have video conferences with customers and partners, they were reluctant to turn on their webcams. And so, sure. I could only affect change, inside our company and really nudge people internally, but we couldn't do that with customers and partners in the same way. I would say one of the good things that's come from this is that, this is new technology. We've had video conferencing tech around for a decade,
right.
In a mass, scale capability, but we just weren't using it. And so the pandemic, I think, kind of forced that change. It's a very simple and obvious example of just how things changed so dramatically, pretty much overnight. Everybody just started flipping their cameras on. We got used to seeing everybody in the living room. I've done podcasts where we've had dogs growling and barking and spouses walking around in the background, and nobody cares anymore. And it's perfect that nobody cares. So now we can, kind of bridge the gap. We can have that improved personal communication and see body language like you and I are sharing right now. And it's just become the norm in a business context. And so I absolutely love that. That's one of the silver linings that will come out of this. And hopefully there'll be some other tech innovation that will be, greater adopted, as well.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, no, I love that I've gotten to see slices of my coworkers' lives, right? It's humanized them in ways that, hey, in a cubicle, I used to see pictures and maybe artifacts of, kids, artwork and stuff. And that's amazing. But actually seeing someone's kid or seeing someone's dog, right? That's been such an amazing gift to, I think, relationship building and connection, team cohesion, all of it.
I think so too. At the risk of turning the conversation a tad negative, I want to kind of put you on the spot a little bit and ask you, as you've looked for some of the strategies and tactics around change management, that have been successful in digital transformation, there have probably been some things that maybe didn't work the way that you expected, or perhaps, strategies or tactics that you used that ended up not getting the results that you expected. Can I put you on the spot and see if there are any stories that really come to mind of something that maybe ended up being a lesson learned of what not to do?
Oh, absolutely. Gosh, I feel like there's so many, within maybe every change I've supported. I don't know that, they're all, total flops. I wouldn't say that, but, within every single change I've been part of across many organizations, there's always an element of a gotcha or, oops, we didn't think about that. And so, I think thinking back to one specific change where we were implementing a new tool, and we recognized that due to our change management team's lack of understanding of the full organization and some recent organization moves that had happened, we totally ignored one part of the organization when doing our stakeholder kind of interviews and understanding, their perceptions of this coming change. We just didn't know that they existed. We didn't know what we didn't know. And that was, a miss on our part, but also we've taken that learning now, and we've been able to make sure that for any change that we are putting forward from here out, we actually get the current list of the org chart or the current picture of where is everyone, and has anything changed since the last change that we've supported, just so that doesn't happen again, right? because those employees felt left out, they felt not considered, and it wasn't intentional, right? And it was because there was a change. We didn't know about it as a change team, which is kind of ironic. And thus we weren't able to bring them along as part of our current next change. So, that one was unfortunate, but every change that's come after that, we now have kind of a new approach or a new tool in our tool belt that we whip out each time.
I appreciate you sharing that example. And I think it's a really good one. How did you find out that you'd left that group out? Like who rang the fire bell, or like, how did that all come about? I'm curious to hear that part of the story.
Yeah, a leader in that team sort of reached out and said, "Hey, what about us?" Right? Like, are we going to be part of this? And we sort of said, "Oh, who are you? What group are you part of?" And it was embarrassing, to be honest. It felt like, we really felt like we dropped the ball. And so not only did we learn about that new group and kind of have this new approach moving forward, but we had the opportunity to bring that group along first in everything that we've done since, just to kind of not make up for it, but just to say, hey, we know you're here now. We know who you are. And we want to make sure that we don't ever leave you out again. So come alongside. So that was an added benefit, I guess.
Yeah. I was curious about that because I wonder how many times things like that have happened, even with well-intentioned change teams that just had an oversight. It happens. We're human. Right. But I wonder how many times the leaders or the members of that other team didn't speak up and instead just ended up being frustrated and disgruntled, and maybe kind of started having some chatter inside the organization that wasn't, super positive or productive. So I'm thrilled to hear in your scenario where somebody spoke up and, kind of forced themselves into the conversation. I think that's actually the best thing that could have happened in that circumstance. But I wonder if there are other circumstances when people don't, speak up to the same level.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure there are. And, I think this would be a good opportunity for anyone who's listening, who's, part of leading change efforts or who's part of, transformation teams, that you sort of ask the question, who do I not know about? Which is, I think, a hard question to ask, but an important one.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm curious about the technology that change management professionals might be leveraging to facilitate what you do in your practice. So I'm not referring to the actual technology you're implementing,
right?
The new enterprise applications and stuff like that. But what kind of tools do you use to help be better change managers?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one that we're trying to stay cutting edge ourselves. So there's some I think a lot of change managers use a pencil and a piece of paper or a keyboard and their fingers, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's the right tool. Yep. Their ears and their heart, right? It's kind of the cheesy answer, but there's actually some really interesting cutting edge things that are coming out. As we talked about change saturation and change fatigue, there's some really amazing tools that are coming to market to help visualize and measure those. And, change managers would input all the changes that they're working through into a system that then would populate and sort of show sort of this matrix of the living, breathing change happening in an organization. And that's something that, we're thinking about and trying to think about, how do we best utilize this and bring this in? And, there's sort of that question of, well, do people really care? Is this something that if we were to bring this in, folks would want to see? So we're trying to be really, careful and intentional with how we're using the tools, and not just, grabbing a cool new tool because it's out and it's cool, but making sure it's going to actually provide value to the organization. And I think to the point of our conversation earlier, I think that being able to visualize and show, here's what's actually happening. So that's, a sneak peek of, I think, what many organizations will be doing, but, it varies.
I could see that being useful for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, first of all, just for the change team themselves to be able to kind of measure where that, the volume of change saturation is even at right now, right? So to have some mechanism to be able to measure that objectively, I think is hugely important. But in light of just all the other things that we've talked about, interfunctional group communication and things like that inside a large enterprise, having a better mechanism to use to then communicate to all of your key stakeholders throughout the business to say, hey, this isn't just the change team saying, hey, our team members are overwhelmed, because that doesn't have a measurement value, but to say, here's an objective assessment of what the level of change that these teams are experiencing, and to open everybody's eyes and minds to, what's going on in the organization might help with that communication, or I can't see it not helping with that communication.
Right. Yeah. It's powerful.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. How do you learn about new things? So obviously, you went back to school to get your master's degree, obviously a heavy academic focus. You were a teacher, so that makes sense. Yep. But how do you learn and continue to, evolve as a professional? Are you, in the old days, a year ago, 2 years ago, we used to go to events and things like that. What are you doing now to stay up in your craft?
Yeah. I try and stay connected to people who are in different organizations who, maybe are in the same industry or even different industries. And I learn a lot, that way. I also am plugged into, different professional organizations for change and learning, just trying to understand, best practices in the industry, what's new, what's going on, and just keep my finger on the pulse there. And then, virtual events and virtual networking and happy hours and, virtual conferences and trainings, really trying to make sure that, I'm challenging myself to think outside of my own current experience. And, ultimately that's going to help me support my organization with, new ideas, new ways of thinking, and also examples of how, other organizations are tackling maybe similar problems.
Yeah. I think that's, the virtual events. I'm curious to see if, in-person events pick up a little bit. It seemed like there was a bit of a trend heading up.
Yeah.
I think the Delta variant started to slow that back down a little bit. So there were a few events that we were looking at participating in that just were canceled or were very underattended. Yeah. So hopefully as we get into 2022, some of those things will pick back up. But in the meantime, as we talked about before, there has been a shift. We're all more comfortable with the idea of doing virtual events and making sure that, they can be productive. So it's good to hear that you're actively involved in that. And I'm going to circle back around to that after I ask this next question. But I am curious to get your take on what your favorite part is about working with technology.
My favorite part is that it's never boring and it's always surprising, right? I can never predict what the latest and greatest technology is going to be and how it's going to improve our lives. And I love that. It's a constant state of surprise and awe and wonder, I think, that technology kind of incites.
I'm with you on that. I think that if somebody were to ask me that question, I think that might be the way that I would answer that well. I get bored easily and I'm stimulated by the frequency of change. And I know it's interesting because I know that actually wears on some others, talking about the change fatigue and things like that, that we talked about before. Some people just want things to stay the same and be predictable. I'm actually very different than that. So I love about technology that it is constantly evolving. There's constantly new things that we can sink our teeth into.
Yeah.
What's on the backside of that though? What don't you like? What do you hate about working with technology?
Ooh, I don't know. Hate's a strong word. I mean, I think I get concerned when technology starts to maybe replace parts of humanity that I personally am not ready for, whether or not it's a good idea or not. But I start to get concerned with, I don't know, replacing the pieces of not necessarily, can a human do it and technology is replacing it. I think in many cases that's a good idea. But I get concerned when technology starts to interfere with human connection or some of those pieces of in-person connectedness that I don't think technology should interfere with, I would say. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think that's what feels true.
Yeah, no, I think it's first of all, it's your answer. It's okay to be your answer. So right. Take it, own it.
Okay.
But what you said reminds me of, I'm a fan of Elon Musk, judge me or don't, whatever. But, I like a lot of the innovation that he's brought, but I think one of the humbling moments that he's had as a major global innovator, no matter what you think of him, his acknowledgement that they put too much robotics into their manufacturing process, and that they found that there actually were some places where humans were actually better and more efficient and effective at doing certain tasks. And that's a little bit different than what you said, because that's not so much about the human bonding elements. But I do think it's interesting that we have to recognize, yes, automation of all forms, robotics and other things are going to replace the need for us to do some menial tasks that are just, probably just done more efficiently by machines. But I do think there'll always be a role, and we just need to be proactive in defining what those new roles are as automation continues to pick up,
Yep. Yeah.
That's good. Well, first of all, we're coming to the end of this, and I want to go back to something that you just said when I was asking you about how you're learning. You talked, a lot about networking and participating in virtual events. So we have just now launched, as of this week, something called the Frontline Innovators Council. It is the fee for entry into the council is your participation on the podcast. So spending the last 45 minutes or so with us has now granted you access to the Frontline Innovators Council. So I am thrilled to, invite you and welcome your participation in the council. What we are doing is really creating a community of folks that have all participated in the Frontline Innovators podcast. So these are folks that are deeply involved in technology innovation and change management support for frontline workers in large enterprise. And so we're bringing together this group of professionals. We've already got a private LinkedIn group set up, and it's a place where we can discuss some of the trends and ask questions and, provide a safe environment for us to all speak freely about some of the things that we're seeing in the organization. So I'd love to invite you to that. You'll get a LinkedIn invite from us today, and we welcome you to that group. And we're just getting fired up, but we've got a lot of exciting things planned for that group. So we look forward to you participating.
Awesome. Well, I'm so honored to be invited. I'm excited to participate. And what a cool idea.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. As I said, we're just getting started, but really looking forward to seeing what we're going to do there. So I do need to wrap it up there. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm certain that the audience has enjoyed it as much as I have. If you have, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. Visit the website at skillful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story, and we'll see you on the next episode.